Esther Feldman.
Community Conservation Solutions. Thank you.
Madam President.
Right, and jump into some of this. I'm at least as impatient as you, Senator Hertzberg. My background is both in the conservation field, but also in public finance, and my work has generated over $3 billion in new conservation funding in California, created a national public finance campaign program that's gone on to create $35 billion. So I take the money part very seriously. I want to describe to you what we've invested in over the last almost a decade. And bear with me, Senator, I've got a prize at the end, but the connective tissue is really important. So we invested over $1.5 million to figure out where and in what order you should do dry weather and stormwater runoff capture projects if you want to get the best bang for your buck. This work led to Senate Bill 985, carried by Senator Pavley, and with Dennis O'Connor's fantastic work to codify dry weather, among other things.
And who was the sponsor?
You. Community Conservation Solutions. Working in partnership with.
Okay.
Just
Right.
Just
So here's what's important about this. Every one of the public parcels, and emphasizing that we're focusing on lands already in public ownership, are in close proximity to storm drains of a certain size so that you're guaranteed that daily dry weather flow. Even when it's done a year or 2 years or 3 years when it's not going to rain, there's enough volume to justify doing the project in the first place.
Right, right.
In addition, we're using metrics here. These are numbers. They're not just guessing projects or somebody's wish list. These are projects that have been very carefully measured to meet a number of benefits. The water quality, how do you clean up the most polluted runoff? Where are the sites that are most polluted? Where are the sites that can get the highest volume of water proximity to storm drains? Where are the sites that are in the communities with the greatest needs? This gets to some of the public health issues that have come up today. All of these, where are the projects that are going to get the best habitat and conservation values? All of these things have to be measured together. We're now taking that several steps further, got public funding and working in coordination with the Air Resources Board to figure out how to qualify runoff capture projects for cap and trade funding, because we're going to be able to show with the numbers that when you capture runoff on enough of these projects, and you are measuring those projects and choosing them for those projects that can capture the most amount of water, clean the most amount of water, and store it and reuse it. So either infiltration and or irrigation on that site or nearby, you can then figure out how much imported water or other water you're displacing, what the energy savings are, and what the reduction in greenhouse gases are. So this is a really important quantitative pathway. So what we came up with in your district,
could qualify.
San Fernando Valley plus environs, both senators.
Right. Sorry, guys, I apologize. You know, all the other, you guys like limited so much of the valley.
Well, this is my senator, so I am his constituent, so that counts for something, right?
I have a little tiny slice of the valley, way over by Studio City. Just
really?
just tiny little slice.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
We missed that in drawing the lines?
I know. So
The map makers on that thing.
you're stuck with me, Hertzberg.
In the upper LA River watershed, which I'd like to remind you does not just include the city of LA. We've got numerous foothill cities, part of the unincorporated area of LA County as well. We are evaluating almost 500 parcels on publicly owned lands. They're all going to have this value. Why is that important?
When are you going to get it done?
Tomorrow.
Okay.
To date, the number of projects done by Department of Water Resources with public money, these water runoff capture projects, is about 26. The number that the city of LA has been able to do is about 25. We need to accelerate that, so we're not talking 25, 35, 45, but we're talking 100, 200, 300 projects. Why is this network, this map important of these prioritized projects? It gets to one of the key issues that you keep bringing up. How do we get private money into this? One of the things that could happen once these plans are put in place, that are now required by Senate Bill 985, and policies will be put in place by 2016, is you could come up with a trading program where private developers who are required to capture 100% of the runoff on their site, but can't always do that if you're building a 20-story or 50-story building on 1 acre and you need the subsurface parking, it's really hard to do that. Now, clearly, there are environmental concerns. You want to make sure you're not giving developers a free ride. They get to just keep polluting water. There's things that, a minimum that would have to be done. But instead of spending $2 or $3 million or $5 million on their site, have them spend 10 million and hold up the process through the EIR and all the other things that take a long time. Process was talked about earlier today. You've got these projects that have already been identified and have been put through this tight matrix and measured, so you know what their benefit is to all of these different items. Then they could put their funds into that pot and have these projects that already have been identified that capture much more runoff than you could do on 1 acre. So if we're identifying these projects on public lands and prioritizing them in part because they can capture water from a large area, instead of spending $5 million on 1 acre of capture, you're spending $5 million maybe capturing water from 500 acres that's running off. So that's where this kind of effort that Senate Bill 985 requires becomes really important, but where state action would be needed to make that kind of trading possible. Right now, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to do. Some of our definitions of watershed at the local level are very, very tiny as opposed to very, very broad.
But Esther, isn't this really the 99-year plan
No.
the tree people talked about? I mean, the challenge here, that these, again, I have a sense of urgency about all this stuff. I've watched the numbers, and it really concerns me, and I know what's going to happen. We're going to have an urgency in one thing. We're going to take away money from a bunch of other stuff, good government, intelligent long-term planning. If you're going to do this, right, I mean, you explained this to me a long time ago, but it's like, okay, you got a developer, you got all the fish dunk and the stuff, you got to deal with that guy. It takes 5 years for that whole thing to happen. You got to then buy this piece of land. It's elegant in its thinking, but how much impact is it really going to have in the orders of magnitude? I mean, it may have much more impact by having this requirement because somebody has a 1 acre site with 3 inches of open space that could percolate in the ground, and instead of buying 500 acres. But in my experiences, this is multiple years. You know, in 10 years, you might get 5,000 acres, right? And then what's the rate of percolation? How many do you actually get in terms of new groundwater for the system? Right? That should be the test. What's the most cost-efficient, least intrusive in other aspects of government, most efficient, most quick thing to do it with the most intelligent greening concept? So how do you do this in a period of, say, 5 years?
Part of the solution.
Part of the solution. That's correct.
It's part of the solution.
Yep.
Yeah,
So,
that's her that she told me earlier.
Well, we've heard the partnerships piece already. All of this is cumulative. Remember how fast your kids grew up. I mean, the 20 years went by really fast. So part of this is we got to make these changes now so that we're changing the trajectory of the ocean liner. And it's not going this way anymore, it's going this way. So some of the other pieces of this that are really important are this quantified process that Senate Bill 985 now requires, and to which we should add the greenhouse gas emission reduction piece. So it's another part of the state piece, either through the budget bill or through a policy bill. Let's add to that kind of planning that now has to happen for capture of dry weather and stormwater runoff, the measurement of their water supply benefit, the measurement of their GHG reductions. I'm not sure why he's laughing, but that's probably a good sign. The other thing that this does, so that's another state action that could happen, and that is very important to qualify these projects.
Have you identified any of these lands in areas where there's underserved people?
Yes,
because one of the big dynamics of this policy is to push the money, cap and trade money where there's underserved communities.
The tool requires that you sort for communities with the greatest need for these kinds of projects, for open space and green space, okay? So that's embedded in it. It's a critical piece, which goes to the public health piece as well. Here's the other reason that this kind of quantitative approach is so important. I'm one of a small fan club that believes that if you plan correctly and do the kind of strategic analysis that's necessary early, that you, in fact, can make Prop 218 work for you at the local level. And we, in fact, are working right now in the Upper LA River watershed to show how that can be done through joint powers authorities with a number of agencies. So I echo some of the concerns you've heard earlier today. What can the state do to make these JPAs between agencies for the purpose of capturing and reusing runoff easier? I don't have an answer to that, but I think there's some incentive that's worthy of a conversation to look at what would incentivize that. The other thing that this quantitative approach does is lay the groundwork for meeting the very strict constitutional requirements that Prop 218 sets up for the nexus between what you're charging people and what you're spending the money on. And that's one of the biggest hurdles that local and regional agencies stumble over, is how to do that, meet that requirement in a way that's waterproof, pun intended, and in a way that produces projects that people actually think they benefit from. Because we understand you got to put stuff underground to capture and store and infiltrate this water, but the general public doesn't really care about that. You have to be able to show that there's these other community benefits that you've heard about. So the Prop 218 piece is an important piece because Prop 1 requires a local match. State revolving fund requires a dedicated source of payback. There are interests in the private sector of other kinds of investment, like the Laborers International Unit of North America, that represents all the non-trade people, the people that pour the concrete and plant the native plants and maintain those native plants. They have 30,000 members just in Southern California alone. They're really interested in investment in their private pension funds. They love these kinds of projects because their people work on them. So if we have a local funding measure that's a piece of it, that's not all, I'm not suggesting it's all of it, it puts you in a position to have those kinds of conversations for other kinds of private funds, whether it's development money or whether it's this kind of investment as well. So just to close, a couple of other things that are really important, I think, to mention is there's a lot of concern about meeting state goals and not just the local and regional goals on local water sustainability. And we've got action goals, we've got 2030, we've got 2050, and these kinds of projects can fit into that, and that's very important. Here's a couple other things that I think should be on the tick list of things the state could address. One of the big hurdles in doing these runoff capture projects is that you go to a city, for example, and I'm not going to necessarily use names, and say, look, we can do this great project, we got a great piece of public land, you're 500 feet from a 5-foot storm drain, and they say, great, why should we put a project in our city when the water that goes underground we don't get any value for? And so we dance around this issue a little bit, but who gets the value of the water supply is a really important piece. So amortized over 30 years, we calculated that doing these smart green projects, or using plants and soils to help clean the water, the polluted water. Somebody asked that question. Plants and soils actually do a very good job if you design them correctly. That the cost per acre foot amortized over a 30-year period is about $1,300. Yeah, between $1,200 and $1,300. That's not including
value or not?
That's not including any of the water supply value. That's just the cost of doing it over time. Okay, so we need to look at how, if you're going to do a project and you're the sanitation department of a given city, how you get that value back if you put that water in the ground. Right now, we don't have any way to do that. It's on a case-by-case basis. It's a very big barrier. I don't have an easy answer, but it's something that I think that we need to talk about. The other piece, one more, is we have a lot of public infrastructure that it's already on an ongoing operations and maintenance schedule. Ports, airports, people have already talked about roads. We should embed in that process a requirement that if you are redoing your road, your port, your airport, whatever those facilities might be, other kinds of transportation, that you have to incorporate runoff, capture, and reuse. There is no requirement for that now. We all see road projects being done every day and put our hands in the air and say, well, why didn't they have to do runoff capture in that project? And last but not least, as a sidebar, which is not really part of this panel, but a number of people have brought it up, these stormwater and dry weather runoff capture projects, if sited correctly, could, when there's not enough water to fill up the volume you've created underground, could also accept high-quality recycled water if we put that into our planning process. And Senator Hertzberg, you brought that up earlier. We've got Hyperion and other sources where we've got recycled water, which is not runoff, that goes into the ocean. We can use these projects to recapture some of that water to help with water supply also.
Like the Sepulveda Basin, we have 2,200 acres. We use it as parks and golf courses. You know, that's what that ultimately is. That's a reclamation basin, right? Sepulveda? Isn't that? It's a flood control basin.
It's a flood control,
Yeah.
Army Corps.
Army Corps, yeah.
And I think that it also is worth exploration of what the state could do to make what we call these partnerships, joint powers authorities between public works agencies, cities, park districts, conservancies, easier, because you need that cross-sector expertise.
Okay. Great. Celeste.
My name is
Oh, I'm sorry, do you have a question? I apologize. Go ahead.
Just on the issue.
Go ahead, please.
This is the transportation chair.
I
Yeah.
keep thinking of water. I have the, in my county, we have a pipe that we built from our recycle plant all the way down to a power plant. It's like about 6-7 miles. So
Case in point.
Water is power.
Yes.
Water is power. So
100%.
when they need power, so any of the, like the University of California might have a cogeneration plant.
They do.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, actually, 93% of the power on site at UC San Diego is created right on site.
There
It's
you go.
unbelievably
That's-
good for a lot of
that's
that
where water
same
can
stuff.
go, you can get it,
Yeah.
so that's
That's
power.
why they're major emitters under AB.
Please, Celeste.
My name is Celeste Cantu. I'm the General Manager of the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, known as SAPA. And I'm going to kind of go off my script here and kind of highlight the important things. We've talked a lot about how we break down the silos that we trip over every day. So it was kind of out of the progressive movement that we decided, because of accountability, that we wanted to create all these different assembly line kind of categories for water. So we have stormwater, we have flood water, we have sewer water, and we have drinking water, and the list goes on. Today, we have legislation and we have revenue streams that keep us in these little silos that we have to protect, because we are only authorized to work within perhaps one or two of those definitions. So that's our biggest problem. We should look at what Australia has done. We have adopted a construct which we call one watershed. We call it, oh wow, it is our planning document, and it is the way we think about water. But legislatively, we cannot manage the water exactly in that same way. We create what we want to bring into being, and then we identify where we have legislative glitches and we have problems, or where we need to cajole other people to do our work for us, because we cannot do it because our joint powers agreement does not allow us under the old 20th century definitions of what water really is. Beautiful. So philosophically, one water, one watershed. Specifically, what you can do is on joint powers legislation. I don't think this would be very difficult.
Yeah.
We are a joint powers agency that came into being in 1968, so we've been practicing this integrated water management for almost 50 years. It's really hard. We've accomplished a lot. We get a lot of kudos for all the great things that we do. It is very, very difficult. I would hope that other people can do it in less than 50 years, but it is laborious. Our biggest problem is not money. Our biggest problem is not even the definition of all these different kinds of waters. The biggest problem is trust and people needing to protect their revenue streams and their hierarchies. We are able to get past that because we can illustrate the synergies and the efficiencies that what can be done when we pretend it is, in fact, one water, one watershed. And we've drank the Kool-Aid. We're into it. What you need to do is, in terms of joint powers, we only have the powers that our 5-member agencies have in common. Luckily, they are really full-service wholesalers, and they do wastewater, and they do some stormwater management, and they manage groundwater, and they sink ground. So we can do a whole lot of things, but we can't do everything. But we would like to define joint powers agreement to allow us to do everything that any one of them can do. So not only the powers they hold jointly, but the full array of their powers. That gives us that flexibility. What we really need to manage water as one water is to create institutions, and this is exactly what Australia went through and has adopted this. Create institutions that can move freely back and forth and don't get hung up on, is this a dry weather flow? Is this a stormwater flow? Is this recycled water? The fact is, water's not owned in California. Water is held collectively by all the people in California. So monetizing water is really challenging. Where you have adjudicated basins, you have all of those regulations. You run into problems where, why should the flood control people do something at their expense in which they get no benefit and probably some inconvenience for? And then you ask maybe a water supplier, you should pay them to do this work for you because you will benefit from it. And they say, no, they have to do that anyway. So why should I pay them to do it? All of that is true. But we need to move past that into a philosophy of one water. So institutionally, people design institutions to follow money. That's the biggest incentive that you can give us. And it's not that we're asking for more money, but we would like to do that. But to allow money to be more flexible and for you to put in guidelines that require people to deal with, let's talk stormwater, in a way that is within the umbrella of integrated regional watershed management. It is inconvenient to do that. No one has the time to do it, to say, I wish to share governance. I wish to give up half of what I would prefer to do because I'm going to respect what you need to do. That's hard to do. We're not geared to do that very well unless you've been practicing it for 50 years. But if you had in your guidelines for the stormwater money, guidelines very similar to what you have in integrated regional water management money that requires people to at least talk and consult and integrate all the floodwaters and the dry weather flows and all of the different elements. You can use that same language. That would be helpful.
But can I just add something? Because I think what you said is exactly right, but I just want to build off of one of the comments that you made, which I think is exactly on the money. And it is when you have all these siloed entities, they're all experts at hiring lawyers and accountants and lobbyists and everybody to protect their interests. My first bill I ever did tried to manage that coming out of the Constitutional Convention and Constitutional Revision Commission in '94, and I had more opposition to that than I've ever had of anything. It had to do with LA, and the first one was the Alameda County Mosquito Abatement District, right? It's the nature of the entities. So that being said, the reason I keep coming back to this issue of a dedicated revenue stream is that as soon as you touch somebody else's jurisdiction, they're going to hit all of us, beat us like crazy. Everybody's going to come up with a way to do it. I'm worried about your cap and trade play because there's already 1 billion people who've already eyeballed that money. Right? I'm worried about the Transportation Committee. That's because we're so successful in reducing gasoline because of gas mileage and all the stuff that Fran's been doing. He's got no money to fix roads, right? So our job here to govern. And what does that big picture look like? And so you have to demonstrate some successes early on. You're in a situation where you're transitioning from this silo world into this new world of figuring out how we can actually turn waste, the stormwater, and the runoff and stuff into something that's real. You got to grab low-hanging fruit where you can have some really cool out projects that are actually happening beyond the theoretical. You can't go after his money on transportation.
Yes.
You can't go after all these other dollars.
Totally agree.
So the notion is...
We have those projects. We don't need to go
projects-
after those other monies because there's tremendous synergies when you look at it in terms of One Water. So this is what happens, and our ratepayers get it really clearly.
But when you go to One Water, I mean, Australia did it, but you'll spend 25 years. The water world is the toughest world in the world.
We're already doing it.
Right?
We created One Water in 2007.
That groundwater bill was
Your groundwater bill?
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's complex.
We want to thank you for the groundwater
We
bill.
have thousands of water agencies. It's just a real challenge.
Yeah, no, I know.
Irrigation districts and property.
It's a real challenge because they're needing to reinvent the wheel,
Yeah.
but there's lots of models of success. We have been doing it for many decades. So
Could you share? Go ahead, Senator Allen.
Oh, I wanted to ask a much more elementary question. So
Go ahead.
okay, I really apologize because I drink a lot of water, but I'm certainly don't have a lot of expertise. Could you just tell us a little bit when you refer to One Water, what that means?
So you follow a drop of H2O and you declassify it by saying the moment it falls in the mountains, it's snow and therefore it's storage. And then when it melts, it's surface water and therefore maybe a water supply after treatment. And then as it goes down the stream, it's surface water. It has a whole different group of laws that govern it. And then it percolates because it's hydrologically connected into a groundwater. Depending if that basin is adjudicated or not, it has a whole nother set of laws that govern it. You pump it out and then you treat it and you serve it up. Once a person has it in their home, it's drinking water and it's dealt with differently. Once we put it on our grass, and people generally put about twice as much water than what they should on their grass, and we're anti-grass, anti-dysfunctional grass, it runs off and then it's a dry weather flow. We have all these different categories that we've built up over time that govern water in the different states, and it causes tremendous inefficiencies. In our plan, we, as a construct, we do away with those, and we manage it just as one resource. And you can demonstrate tremendous synergies in doing that, and we have implemented projects that do that, and they're less expensive, they're more efficient, but the law is not on our side.
So you're effectively talking about creating more coherence and cohesion to the way we.
He's talking about a revolution.
Yeah, because it's exactly what a revolution you
We're
are. That's
at
my
a
point.
point where
we're
we
okay
need
with
a
it.
revolution. The challenges the water world in California face are so great that We cannot solve these by solving our problems one by one by one. It does not happen. The only way we can solve this and get through the 20th century is if we have a shared vision that we then implement and bring into reality what we want, as opposed to trying to pick off problems where we continually regenerate new problems.
I want to talk to
So,
Angie.
and how does this, so Australia's been referred to a number of times. Do they just do a much better job of creating a regulatory system that's much more coherent?
No water agencies, the country owns it,
Just all
or
done.
the states.
And you're never going to change that. All the legal
Actually, the
issues.
state of California, or the Californians in the state of California, do own the water in
I
California.
understand, but you're never getting rid of all the local water agencies.
No,
kill you.
and you don't need to. And they provide a tremendous service, and that's what they charge for. They can only charge for their service.
Right.
So the things we would ask you to do is define joint powers agreements so that we can enjoy all of the powers of our members, not just the ones in common. To think about, at least dream about, what you could, all the great things you could do if it were one water. And then there's been a lot of talk about dry weather flows here. We think the only responsible thing to do is to eliminate dry weather flows, and we've done that. You do that with a budget-based rate, where you give people and this is all proven stuff, you give people a budget. When they go over it, they're receiving a price signal that will really get their attention. So you're not having what we generally expected before we saw is 50% of all the water that's put on the grass, which is 80% of all treated water in the inland, closer to 60%. So these are big numbers, closer to the coastal. Half of that, because we're not very good irrigators of our non-functional grass, half of that becomes dry weather flows. That creates TMDLs that then cities have to spend millions of dollars trying to abate. That whole loop is, is not very efficient. With a price signal, we have virtually eliminated dry weather flows. People don't waste water when it's expensive to do so.
We'll finish it. Okay. Great. Perfect.